This is Caroline from Caroline's Adventure. We all face challenges in our lives. How do some people take those challenges and turn them into powerful results? Join me as we dig into a story on resilience, hope, and joy, and uncover lessons we can each use in our own lives. But before we start, please take a moment to show that 5-star rating button some love, and follow while you're there to be updated every time I release a new episode. Now, before we begin, a word of caution. On this podcast, we regularly discuss topics like sexual assault, suicide, and addiction, which may be disturbing to some. Please take care as you listen. And if you need support in the United States, reach out to the crisis text line at 741-741. Thank you, Emma Churchman, for joining us today. Emma's got one of those amazing stories of resilience that totally resonated with me just because as someone who grew up in trauma, when I looked through Emma's story, I was like, I get how that can absolutely form some of your experiences later in life. And it's funny how the more of these interviews that I do, the more I find that people who advocate for trauma victims later in life usually have a deep-rooted history of it in their childhood. And so tell us a little bit about you and the background of your story.
Yes. It's so funny. I was doing a podcast interview the other day on domestic violence and trauma, and I totally forgot to mention that I came from trauma, right? That I've got a whole history, generations of horror, physical, emotional, sexual abuse. And I was thinking about, why did I forget to mention that critical component to my history? And it's because something significant happened for me in the wake of Hurricane Helene. So I live here in Western North Carolina, and I live in a tiny community of 300 people in rural Appalachia outside of Asheville. I live on top of a mountain. Our entire community was devastated by the hurricane. So we have community members who lost their homes, people whose property was damaged. Every single one of our roads was destroyed. All of our private bridges were washed out. We were without power for 17 days. And even after that, it was intermittent for months. I ended up having to close down my online business because I could not run it without power and without being able to get off the mountain. So one of the things that I learned during this time, as I was volunteering my services as a trauma chaplain, because that's my background, I was trying to help people in our community because no one showed up. We didn't see FEMA till day 27. So in a lot of ways, we were really on our own. And so I'm working with these people, working with my own trauma. A month before the hurricane, one of my brothers died by suicide. 2 weeks after the hurricane, another brother died by suicide. So there's all of this complicated grief and trauma happening. And I thought to myself, I do not want to spend the next decade on a therapist couch, hanging out, trying to get over what's happening right now. That sounds like a terrible way to invest my time and energy. There has to be a way to recover from trauma in real time. It's got to be possible. So that's what I started doing for myself. And that's what I started helping my community members do, was to process what was happening for us in the moment so it wouldn't stay with us for months and years.
Wow. And it's amazing. Like every time you share a little bit more, I relate more to you. So I recently uncovered additional trauma in my life, and I had known growing up that my father was physically, verbally, and emotionally abusive. And I talk openly about that. It's a big driver for me for why I have a podcast that delves into resilience, because my own personal resilience is something that I just figured people did. I never really gave it much thought until I started talking about it openly, and I realized that there's a lot of people that are still mired in trying to work through their trauma. And in an interview a couple of months ago with one of the top female trauma experts in Australia, she starts listing off how you identify if you've had childhood sexual trauma. And each time she would tick one off, I'd be like, huh, that's weird. And in the process of her interview, she planted enough seeds that afterwards, I had a lot of these wispy memories start to really gel. And it's weird because it never quite took the same cohesion that the physical abuse flashbacks have. But there was enough there for me to be like, oh my goodness, I've been dealing with this trauma. And so a couple of months ago, I had that same kind of realization of I've dealt with so much at this point that I don't want to spend the next decade digging myself out from underneath this. And so I'm excited to hear what you have found about how to, I don't want to say speed up the process because it is a process, but I would love to hear what you have to say about how to get your life back and heal from it and not just push it back down again, but how do you deal with such heavy things and get through it faster without just dedicating your entire life to digging into the root of it?
Yes, I want to address that. Let me say one more thing about resilience, Caroline, because I think this is a really important conversation for us to be having as a society.
Yes.
Because we've got to acknowledge that the rate of traumatic events is speeding up. For example, if you look at natural catastrophes in and of themselves as traumatic events, they have increased by 300% in the past decade, which is unheard of. And I'm just thinking about, we're recording this now in 2025, which started mid-January with the wildfires in Los Angeles. And then we had the tornadoes in Kentucky and in Mississippi. Like east of the tornado zone, we had these tornadoes in the spring. And then we got more hurricanes coming in, right? So we're being bombarded not only by natural disasters, but other traumatizing events politically, economically, societally. And we have to learn how to become more resilient in the face of them. So, this idea that we are victims or even survivors, we've got to find a way to move beyond those labels because they're holding us back. Does that?
One of the things that I didn't realize until my recent trip down to Black Mountain is that Western North Carolina is still reeling from the impacts of Hurricane Helene. And then they had widespread wildfires kick off afterwards. And I didn't see any of that. And that's an area that I paid attention to because it is a place where a huge part of my heart is. And it amazed me because I'm like, we have entire communities that are still hurting, that are still struggling. When I went down a couple of months ago, the number of people that are living in travel trailers without running water or electricity, and they have no end in sight. It's not like this is a temporary thing. They've been living in a travel trailer for a year now, and there is no support coming. And that broke my heart, and it made me realize I hadn't realized that the intensity had increased that much. But I knew that, wow, we're clearly becoming less aware of these things as they speed up.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But they are still impacting us traumatically. So psychotraumatologist Peter Levine talks about the impact of trauma not by the event itself, but by the symptoms that we carry. For example, PTSD, depression, overwhelm, anxiety, sleeplessness, that kind of thing can impact us regardless of how extreme the traumatic event is. It's simply how our body processes what that event is. I teach 4 phases of trauma recovery. I have a trauma recovery certification program that allows coaches and healers and practitioners and employees of disaster organizations to become trained in these 4 phases to help other people recover from trauma more quickly. And the first phase is the rescue phase, where we're deer in headlights, the event has just happened. And what we've got to do in that particular phase is figure out how to get back in our bodies. Because as soon as we don't feel safe, as soon as humans don't feel safe, what we're going to do is we're going to check out
Yeah.
and get out of our body because it's not a safe place to be. So part of what really helps in that phase is to remember to breathe. A lot of people stop breathing after traumatic events, and the breath is so powerful as a way to help us ground and get more present in our body.
It's interesting that you say that. Something that I learned long ago is that physiologically, fear and excitement are the same physiological impact on your body. The biggest difference is in fear, you stop breathing, and in excitement, you continue to breathe. So in fear, you
Wow.
quit breathing, your body builds up lactic acid, which continues to build more fear. And so you get that like feeling in the pit of your stomach. When you're in a moment of fear, if you can force yourself to breathe through it, it can completely shift how it resonates with you and the impact that it has on you long term.
That's super cool. I
Isn't
love
that
that.
amazing? And it's something that I have learned when I do anything big that's scary to me. I force myself to slow down and breathe through it. And it's amazing how often I can take big events that normally would terrify me and turn them into something that I look at as an adventure. And I'm like, you know what? This is exciting. I reframe it in my mind and force myself to breathe through it. And it's crazy the impact that just awareness can have on that.
Yes. And in fact, what you're doing, Carolyn, is really interesting because you're shifting your energy from why is this happening to me, almost to how is this happening for me? And when we can do that kind of reframe, instead of this is the worst thing, can't believe this, which puts us into victim energy or survivor energy, when we put ourselves into how is this happening for me, it allows us to look at the event in a whole new way and gives us the power and responsibility to claim what's really happening.
Absolutely. I love that. So you said there's 4 steps?
Yep. Four
What are
phases. So the first is reconstruction, excuse me, rescue, where we're really just trying to get present in our bodies, focusing on getting basic needs met. In our case with Helene, it was getting shelter, food, and water. Then the next phase is recovery. And that's when you're taking an assessment of the lay of the land, what's happening. You're noticing that you're having emotions, right? A lot of times when you're in rescue, when something just happens, you can't really pay attention to your emotions. So, again, with the example of after Helene, people were really just trying to find food and water. There wasn't a lot of, oh my gosh, why is this happening? This is horrible. It was simply, let me make it to the next day. And then recovery is when we start to acknowledge our emotions and start to feel them in our body. And that adrenaline starts to slow down a little bit. And that's when we're able to, we can use different techniques. Like in this phase, I'll often use the EMDR flash technique, which is a way to very quickly reset your nervous system so that you're out of that fight and flight mode and you're able to be more present and grounded with your own emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the fourth one is?
Yeah, the third phase is reconstruction,
Okay.
where we decide who we want to become as a result of this event, right? How we want to move through it to a different version of ourselves. Some people don't want to engage in a different version of themselves. They want to just go back to the way things were. But I don't think that's necessary. And I don't necessarily even know that's healthy at this point. Because really, we have the opportunity every time a traumatic event happens, we have the opportunity to grow and change from it. And then the fourth phase is evolution, where we become that next version of ourselves with whatever we're called to do. For example, with my business having to shut it down, I spent a lot of time writing daily Facebook posts to let the world know about what was going on here because the media was telling a much different story than what was actually happening on the ground. Thousands of people started reading those Facebook posts. A publisher reached out to me asking if we could turn them into a book. I published The Deep End of Hope in the Wake of Hurricane Helene and then landed 2 more contracts with that same publisher for 2 more books, plus rebranded my entire business to only focus on trauma recovery. So that was my own version of evolution of this horrible series of events happened. But when I pivoted to how is this happening for me, all of these doors opened.
Isn't it amazing how once you make peace with the fact that there is no going, I find that people get so mired in the how do I get back to where I was? And the
Yeah,
truth is, you can't go back.
right.
No matter how hard you try, that version of your life is done. And you have 2 choices. You can let yourself get mired down in the lamenting of the fact that you can't go back. Or you look at it and you say, okay, cool. How can I do the best with what I've got now? And where do I go from here with this?
Yes, exactly.
And it's amazing how freeing that is once you come to that point of peace with it. But you do have to do a certain level of mourning before you can let go of that old whatever it was.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And allowing that instead of fighting against it or trying to make it different than what it is helps you to move through it more quickly and effectively.
Absolutely. So I know that you've got a new book coming out that's talking about your mother's multiple personalities.
Yep.
How hard was that to write?
Yeah, that was really hard to write. So, my mother has one of the most extreme cases of multiple personality disorder, now known as dissociative identity disorder, in ever diagnosed. So, she's got 123 personalities. And she was diagnosed when I was 14 and spent a decade being suicidal before and after that diagnosis. And so the memoir, which is Unshattered, also behind me, is the story of how I navigated that with my three younger brothers and my mother and father, and the impact that had on our family because we had all three of my brothers now have died by suicide. Our father died by suicide. And then our mother had this extreme mental illness. So it's the story of how that kind of legacy of abuse gets created and the choices that we make or don't make that impact how we heal or don't heal from abuse.
Absolutely. When you were growing up the first 14 years, were you aware that she had multiple personalities, or was it just she was real quirky and you're like, once she was diagnosed, you're like, ah, that was what was going on?
Exactly. Yeah. So I just thought other mothers had childlike personalities. I just thought other mothers dressed a lot differently at different times. There was no understanding of what was happening until the diagnosis.
Isn't it weird how our version of normal is so completely ingrained in who we are, at least in my experience, until
Yeah.
someone else hears it and they're like, that's really strange. And then you're like, huh. And you start to take things apart. Anytime I open up about my background with people, I've learned to be very careful with it because what I grew up in as quote unquote normal is so completely antithetical to what most people's experiences are of childhood that they have a really hard time even handling it.
Yeah.
And for me, it just is what it is. It's not even a big thing because it's what I grew up in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And especially when you're a child, you don't have that context to know it's not normal or that it's not okay.
It's amazing that you've taken what was for your father and your brothers couldn't face any longer. And you've taken it and used it as a way to help others as opposed to letting it tear you apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, one of the things that really allowed that was my journey into ministry and my relationship with God. I don't need to get super religious. I am a Quaker minister, I am a nationally certified trauma chaplain. And one of the things that helped me move forward was God's voice in the center of my forehead guiding me with here's the next step because I didn't have role models
Yeah.
helping me see the next
Yeah.
step.
I feel like one of the big steps that helps people move through stuff like this is looking for ways to help others with it.
Yes.
And it's amazing how, for me, as soon as I started realizing that I had all these repressed memories of sexual assault, and once I had gotten my feet back up underneath me again, the very first thing was, as uncomfortable as this is for me, I need to start talking about this openly so that others that are still trying to figure out how to bring it to the forefront and deal with it can see the process. And it was hard. It was really hard for me to open up about that part of my childhood. But I've already had so many people reach out and thank me and say, you know what? I had these pieces that I wasn't looking to deal with yet, but seeing you go through that process has
Ah.
given me the strength to do it myself. And it's amazing how much that helped me in my own healing.
Yes. Yeah, that connection to others is part of our humanity and part of what allows us to heal, as well as the stories we tell ourselves. So that reframing that you and I have been talking about is also part of that healing process.
That's really interesting. The reframing piece. I don't know that I had even thought of what a critical component that is, but tell me a little bit more about that.
There are lots of ways to, so for example, when you and I first started talking, I was sharing the story of how I forgot I was a domestic violence survivor, right? And that didn't register because I've reframed that to I am someone who's pioneering the field of trauma resilience and I help others recover from trauma in real time. That's the story that I'm telling more than I am a victim of severe physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And when you hear those two things, I'm pioneering the field of trauma resilience versus I'm a victim, there's different energy behind those two stories.
That's amazing. So you talked about feeling the call in the center of your head to pull you down this path. Do you think that you were open to it and that's what enabled you to hear that voice? Or I'm always curious what makes some people shift into resilience and makes other people completely
Yeah.
just incapable and it eats them alive.
Yeah. And that's the foundational question, right? I love
Yeah.
that you're asking that. And that's an important question to ask. That's a question that I asked myself. That's why I wrote that second book, Unshattered. And for me, I think I was born this way. I was born for more life. And I don't think that my brothers and my father were born that way. I think they were born from a perspective that life is suffering and you're just trying to get through it. And I was born from the perspective of show up 100% for what all of life has to offer us. How about
Yes.
for you?
That's interesting that you say that because I recently shared a post on social media. When I was in first grade, I went to Fairview Elementary School outside Silva,
Oh, yeah.
and I had a PE teacher, and all I can remember is he was huge. He was this huge man with this huge booming voice. And in first grade, we were doing rope climbing, and I could not get myself up that rope. I could make it like a little bit of the way up, and then I would slide back down again. I had so much rope burn on my hands. And he pulled me aside, and I can remember being just terrified. And here's this huge man, shaved head, and he squats down at my level. And I'm like, oh man, I don't even know what I did wrong. I'm trying so hard, and I just can't get up that rope. And coming from a family of abuse, like when an adult sees you, it's not a good thing. Yeah, I spent a lot of my life trying not to be seen so that I
Mm.
wouldn't pull any more abuse from my father. And so this huge man gets down at my level and he looks me in the eye and says, Caroline, do you know what I like about you? And I'm like, I have no idea. And he said, you have persistence and you have perseverance. And any task that I put you at, you're not necessarily the first one that gets it, but I know you're going to stick with it until you do.
Wow.
And I wasn't sure what that meant. I
Mm.
thought I knew what those words meant, but I went home and I looked them up because I was like, that's not how I saw myself. But it was amazing how him taking the moment to show that to me has impacted my life so much. And back to your point, I'm sure that on some level I was created that way.
Mm.
Like you, I bring 100% to anything I do. I either do it well or I don't do it at all. And it can be my superhero power, but it can also be my biggest flaw because when I put myself at a task, I am almost physically incapable of quitting until I've got it to where I view it as successful.
Yeah.
And so, be it fundraising for a school that's closing, be it anything else I do, be it healing from discovering sexual trauma, I had to like just dig as deep as I possibly could into it until I had made it through. And I wish I had a little bit more moderation in that. You don't have to do it all at once. But to your point, I think part of it is how I'm made that when I see an issue, I have to address it. I'm not good at just letting things go and letting things slide.
Yep. I hear that. Yeah, so that might be, I have that too. So that might be a commonality for
Yeah.
people who are resilient.
Yeah. And that's interesting. That's really because I'm always trying to figure out what it is that makes people go through the exact same situation and one becomes an alcoholic and has a series of unhealthy relationships, and the second one looks for how to be the best version of themselves that they can be because they don't want to repeat what it is that they came from.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So one of the things I saw you mentioning in here was how you came from generations of trauma and you decided to create a different pattern going forward. What do you think makes you successful in that?
Stubbornness. Stubbornness. And when my third brother died by suicide, I already had the book contract for the Unshattered book. But when that happened, I thought, I can't fucking hold this inside me any longer.
Yeah,
I have to honor my brothers by telling their story.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is because otherwise, they made the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
And by writing this eulogy, essentially,
Yeah.
to them and your father, it gives that sacrifice purpose to help others.
Yes. And it destigmatizes
Yeah.
suicide and
Yes.
the legacy of abuse, which is very important to me.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. It truly is. Because it's hard. I sometimes struggle with, do I lean into this too much? Am I giving this more energy than it deserves?
Yeah. Fair.
My father's horrible choices, my mother's horrible choices, which are caring for the horrible choices of their parents and probably their parents before them. I don't know that. I work really hard to not carry that forward with my children, but I'm like, okay, by talking openly about this, am I giving this more energy than it deserves?
I think it's the framework. Are you talking about it in order to get attention, or are you talking about it from the perspective of education and transforming what's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's for me, very much is about letting people know that none of us are perfect. A lot of people look at my life. I did a really good job for a long time of creating that facade of perfection. And then I had an accident back in 2012 that completely hit the reset button on my life. I had to relearn how to walk. I ended up with a traumatic brain injury. I was hit by a car while walking.
Oh my gosh.
And it essentially wiped away my ability to all of my executive functioning skills that I had relied so heavily on to maintain this facade of capability and perfection. Those executive functioning skills were gone.
Yeah.
And I had these huge holes in my memory. I couldn't rely on my brain any longer. And it was humbling. And what I realized was that this facade that I had maintained for so long didn't serve me. It didn't serve anyone. I was telling these stories about my childhood because I was trying to still protect my parents, even though they had never protected me. And I
Yep.
realized that by being open and honest about my story, I gave others the license to be real about theirs.
Yeah.
And ironically, the more open I became, the more my social media following grew. And what I realized is that we're all desperate to realize that we aren't alone. And we have what I consider an entire generation of the walking wounded.
Right. Yep.
Like I hear so many stories from people who you would never imagine about their sexual abuse, their physical abuse, their emotional abuse, their verbal abuse. And we're all so much more alike than we realize. And by taking the stigma, just as you said, taking the stigma away from the death by suicide, taking the stigma away from surviving abuse and figuring out a way to take it and thrive, we need to be more open with one another and more honest with one another and more transparent about what it is we've gone through.
Yes. And be willing to evolve beyond it. We are the only species on this planet who has the level of consciousness to be able to create any reality that we desire. Yet we hold ourselves back under these labels of wounded, victim, survivor, whatever, because I think it happens for a couple of reasons. One is community is important to us. And if we aren't belonging to this label, then who are we? Right? Who are we to thrive in life and work and family and health and money all at the same time, right? Somehow that's not allowed, yet we have the full capability to create all of that abundance for ourselves. And that's the direction that I want us to see us going in as a society, where we are choosing to actively thrive in multiple ways simultaneously instead of just get by.
And ironically, by hiding parts of ourselves, we prevent ourselves from genuinely being part of community.
Yes.
The more we stand in our authenticity, the more we truly connect in with our community.
Yes.
That's fascinating. I love that you talk about the fact that we are these divinely complicated creatures, and yet we focus so hard on avoiding the thing that we want the most, which is to be seen in who we truly are and loved for who we are.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you think, if somebody is in the depths of it right now, what do you see as the single best way to help themselves move forward?
Yeah, ask yourself the question, how is this happening for me?
Ah, back to the, I love that. Instead of to me, for me.
Yep, start with the reframe.
Love that.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
so with Hurricane Helene, when we had no power, no water, no Wi-Fi, no one from the outside showing up, didn't know who was alive and who was dead, when I asked myself that question, I thought, oh my gosh, there's so much benefit in this, because now I get to spend all day, every day with my neighbors. I get to be of service to people in my community. I get to be boots on the ground with them. I don't have to be on social media. I don't have to be on my computer all day long. I just started listing all of the benefits, and
I
that
love
was
that.
incredibly helpful.
I love that. And it's crazy how just that shift in energy brings more of what it is that you're looking for into your existence. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. One thing I always like to ask at the end of the interview is, if you were to leave everybody with one overarching thought, what would that be?
It would be, we have to learn how to process trauma in real time. We have run out of time to do it any other way.
That's so true. And the more you hide from it, the bigger it gets.
Yep.
It doesn't get easier. I love that.
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. Any online bookseller is selling my books. The second one comes out on October 14th. I'm not sure when this podcast will go live. And then I'm also offering a free do-it-yourself heal your own trauma course. It's an online course where you get a daily teaching to learn how to process your own trauma in real time. And it comes with monthly group Q&A calls with me, where you can
Ooh.
ask questions and get some individual support.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Caroline's Adventure podcast. While you're here, subscribe to the show so you're the first to catch new episodes when they're released. And if you enjoyed hanging out with me today, please leave a 5-star rating. For links to social media and more content, visit the description for this episode or go to carolinesadventure.com. That's Caroline with 2 A's, adventure.com.